The wind whipped through the overgrown hedges as Claire pulled her battered sedan up the cracked driveway, the engine sputtering in protest. The mansion loomed ahead, a hulking mass of stained stone and sagging eaves, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Ivy strangled the porch columns, and the front door hung crooked on its hinges. To most, it looked like a haunted house from a forgotten century. To Claire, it was the last hope she had left. Her daughter, Lily, pressed her face to the window, eyes wide with a mix of fear and wonder. "Is this really it, Mom?" she whispered. Claire forced a smile, though her heart was pounding. "This is it, sweetheart. Our new home." They stepped out into the biting wind, boots crunching on gravel. Claire's hands shook as she fumbled with the heavy iron key, the one the lawyer had handed her with a look of pity. The lock groaned, then gave way, and the door creaked open to reveal a grand, dust-choked foyer. The air inside was cold and smelled of mildew and old secrets. Before they could even set down their bags, a car pulled up behind them. Claire's stomach dropped. She recognized the silver SUV and the perfectly coiffed woman who stepped out, heels sinking into the mud. Her ex-mother-in-law, Judith, surveyed the mansion with a look of open disdain, her lips curling as if she'd tasted something sour. "So you actually moved in," Judith called, her voice echoing off the stone. "I suppose beggars can't be choosers." Claire straightened, refusing to let the sting show. "It's what we have." Judith's husband, Robert, joined her, arms crossed. "You know, Claire, you could have asked for help, but I suppose pride comes before the fall." Lily shrank behind her mother, clutching her backpack. Claire put a protective arm around her. "We'll be fine." Judith laughed, sharp and cold. "You'll be lucky if the roof doesn't collapse on you. That place is a money pit. Everyone in town says so. But I suppose you always did have a taste for lost causes." The SUV sped away, leaving Claire and Lily alone in the silence. Claire closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She could still hear the neighbors' whispers from earlier that morning at the gas station. "That's the woman who inherited the old Greystone place. Poor thing. She'll never make it work." The words clung to her like cobwebs. Inside, the mansion was even worse than she remembered from the lawyer's tour. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, and the grand staircase was missing half its balusters. But as Claire led Lily through the echoing halls, she felt something else beneath the decay, a sense of possibility, a whisper of stories waiting to be told. They set up camp in the least damaged room, eating sandwiches by flashlight. As darkness fell, Claire wandered the halls, her footsteps echoing. In the library, she paused before a wall of empty shelves, her fingers tracing the dust. She didn't know it yet, but behind one of those shelves, a secret waited. A secret that would test her courage, change her family's fate, and prove that sometimes the ugliest places can hide the most extraordinary treasures. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time, not so long ago, when Claire's world was filled with the ordinary chaos of school drop-offs, grocery lists, and bedtime stories. She'd had a job she didn't love but could count on, a small apartment with peeling paint but a view of the city lights, and a daughter who believed the world was safe and full of possibility. But life, Claire had learned, could unravel with terrifying speed, and the safety nets she'd always assumed would catch her had holes she never saw coming. It started with the layoff. The company had been struggling for months, rumors swirling like autumn leaves, but Claire had clung to hope. She was good at her job, reliable, efficient, the kind of person who stayed late to help others finish their work. But when the pink slips came, her name was on the list. The severance was barely enough to cover a month's rent, and the job market was flooded with people just like her, hard-working, desperate, and invisible. At first, Claire tried to shield Lily from the truth. She packed her lunches with a smile, walked her to the bus stop, and spent her days scouring job boards at the library. But as the weeks stretched into months, the bills piled up. The landlord's patience wore thin. The fridge grew emptier. Claire sold what she could, her mother's old jewelry, the TV, even Lily's outgrown clothes. She told herself it was temporary, that something would come through, that she just needed a little more time. The eviction notice came on a Thursday, taped to the door in bold, impersonal print. 30 days. Claire read it 3 times before she let herself cry. Silent tears in the bathroom while Lily watched cartoons in the next room. She called every number she could find, friends, family, social services, but help was always just out of reach. Her parents were gone. Her brother lived 3 states away and barely scraped by himself. And Lily's father was a ghost, sending the occasional birthday card, but little else. They moved into the car first, telling Lily it was an adventure, a camping trip. Lily was old enough to sense the truth, her eyes searching her mother's face for reassurance. Claire parked in church lots, behind grocery stores, anywhere they wouldn't be noticed. She learned which gas stations had clean bathrooms, which shelters had the shortest lines, and how to make a dollar stretch until it snapped. The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the shame. The way people looked through her. The way Lily's laughter grew quieter. The way hope became a memory she could barely recall. Claire kept a notebook in her purse, scribbling lists of jobs, shelters, and dreams she was afraid to speak aloud. Every morning she woke before dawn, watching her daughter sleep, and promised herself she'd find a way out. One night, after a particularly cold rain, Claire sat in the front seat, her hands wrapped around a cup of gas station coffee, staring at the dashboard. Lily slept in the back, curled under a pile of blankets. The radio played softly, a song from Claire's childhood, and for a moment, she let herself remember the girl she used to be, fearless, full of plans, certain the world would bend to her will. She wondered what that girl would think of her now. It was in that moment, as she watched the rain streak the windshield, that her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, the area code from a place she'd never been. She almost didn't answer, but something in her gut told her to pick up. "Hello, is this Claire Bennett?" The voice was formal, practiced, but not unkind. "Yes, this is Claire. My name is Richard Evans. I'm an attorney with Evans & Price, representing the estate of Mrs. Eleanor Greystone. I believe you're her granddaughter." Claire's mind raced. She remembered her grandmother only vaguely, a quiet woman who'd sent Christmas cards with crisp $20 bills tucked inside. She'd lived alone, somewhere up north, a relic of another era. "I'm sorry to inform you that Mrs. Greystone passed away last month. In her will, she named you as the sole beneficiary of her property in Greystone Hollow. I know this is unexpected, but if you could call my office, we can discuss the details." Claire hung up, her hands trembling. She stared at the phone, then at her sleeping daughter, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months, possibility. She called the number the next morning, her voice shaky as she spoke to the lawyer. He explained that the property was a mansion left to Eleanor by her own parents decades ago. It wasn't much, he warned, but it was paid off, and the taxes were current. If she wanted it, it was hers. The next days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and cautious hope. Claire scraped together enough for gas, packed what little they had left, and pointed the car north. She told Lily they were going on an adventure, that they'd have a place to call their own. Lily asked if there would be a bed for her, if she could have her own room. Claire promised she'd do her best. As they drove, Claire's mind spun with questions. What would they find? Was it even safe? Could she turn a derelict mansion into a home? But beneath the fear was a stubborn thread of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, this was the break they needed. The journey was long, the miles ticking by in a blur of highway signs and rest stops. They sang songs, played games, and watched the landscape change from city to countryside to the lonely stretches of forest that marked the edge of the world. At night, Claire lay awake in motel beds, listening to her daughter breathe, and dared to imagine a future where they belonged somewhere again. By the time they reached the weed-choked driveway that led to the mansion, Claire was exhausted but determined. She gripped the steering wheel, her heart pounding with fear and anticipation. Whatever waited for them beyond that battered door, it had to be better than what they'd left behind. And as the mansion loomed into view, strange and silent against the gray sky, Claire whispered a silent prayer for strength, for luck, for a chance to start over. She didn't know what secrets the house held, or how it would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But as she looked at her daughter, her face pressed to the window, she knew she'd do whatever it took to give them a home, even if it meant facing the ghosts of the past, the darkness of the unknown, and the weight of a legacy she'd never asked for. Claire sat in the car, the engine ticking as it cooled, her hands resting on the steering wheel. The mansion loomed before her, a monument to faded grandeur and years of neglect. Its windows stared back at her like empty eyes, and the wind rattled the loose shutters, making the whole place seem to shiver. Lily was quiet in the back seat, hugging her knees to her chest, her breath fogging the window. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the unspoken fears and fragile hopes that had carried them this far. Claire's mind raced with questions. Was this really a chance at a new beginning, or just another dead end? The lawyer's words echoed in her memory. "It's not much, Ms. Bennett. Just an old house in the woods, but it's yours. Free and clear." She tried to picture what not much meant in the context of their lives. Was it better than the backseat of a car? Better than the endless shuffle from shelter to shelter, the constant fear of being turned away? She thought of the nights spent parked behind supermarkets, the mornings spent washing up in gas station bathrooms, the way Lily had stopped asking for sleepovers, the way Claire had started to dread the sound of her own phone ringing. But this was different. It was a place, a structure, a roof. It was also a relic of a time when families built homes to last generations. when secrets could be buried as deep as the roots of the forest? What would it mean to raise her daughter in a place built for survival, not for living? What would it do to them, to her, to call a house like this home? She stepped out of the car, boots crunching on gravel, and walked to the door. The wood was cold beneath her hand, the carvings rough and strange. She pushed it open, the hinges shrieking in protest, and peered inside. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and dust, but it was dry and the walls looked solid. She flicked her flashlight across the space, imagining beds in the corners, shelves for food, a table for homework and meals. It would take work, more work than she'd ever done, but it was possible, maybe. Claire returned to the car, her mind racing. She thought of the risks, the isolation, the unknown dangers, the possibility that the house was uninhabitable. She thought of Lily, her need for stability, for friends, for sunlight and laughter. She thought of herself, of the exhaustion that clung to her bones, the hope that flickered and threatened to go out. Was she strong enough to do this? Was she foolish to even try? Lily's voice broke the silence. "Mom, are we staying here?" Claire turned, meeting her daughter's gaze in the rearview mirror. She saw fear there, but also trust. A trust that Claire would do what was best, that she would keep them safe. Lily waited, her small hands twisting the hem of her coat. Claire took a deep breath and opened the car door. She walked around to Lily's side, opened the door, and knelt in the gravel. "I don't know what this place will be like," she said softly. "It's not what I imagined, but it's ours. We can make it work if we try. It won't be easy, but I think we can do it together." Lily nodded, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and excitement. Claire stood, drawing a deep breath. She walked back to the house, this time with purpose. She explored every room, making mental lists of what needed fixing, what could be salvaged, what might be possible. She found a small wood stove in the kitchen, dusty but intact. There were water pipes, old but unbroken. The walls were thick, the windows heavy with old glass. It was safe, at least from the world outside. She returned to the car one last time, gathering their few belongings. She carried Lily's backpack, her own duffel, the bag of groceries, and the battered suitcase that held everything they owned. Together, they crossed the threshold, stepping into the unknown. That night, as they huddled together on the floor of the main room, Claire listened to the wind howl outside and felt, for the first time in months, a fragile sense of hope. The house was cold and empty, but it was theirs. It was a chance to build something new, to reclaim a future that had seemed lost. Claire lay awake long after Lily had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling, her mind filled with plans and worries and dreams. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or what secrets the house might hold, but she knew this. She had chosen to stay, to fight, to hope. And that, she realized, was the first step towards something better. The first morning in the mansion arrived with a silence so deep it felt almost sacred. Claire woke to the faint gray light filtering through cracked, dusty windows, her breath visible in the cold air. Lily was still asleep, curled beneath a pile of blankets, her face peaceful for the first time in weeks. For a moment, Claire let herself believe they were safe, that the worst was behind them. But as she sat up, the reality of their situation pressed in from all sides. The house was colder than she'd imagined possible. The ancient radiators were silent, and the only hope for warmth was the small wood stove in the kitchen, which Claire had managed to coax to life with the last of the firewood stacked by the back door. She wrapped herself in her coat and boots, then set out to explore, determined to understand what they were up against. The mansion was a labyrinth of rooms and hallways, each one darker and damper than the last. The main living area was vast, with a ceiling that arched high above, the plaster cracked and stained. A grand staircase, its banister missing in places, led up to a second floor where the air grew colder and the light dimmer. Claire found a kitchen with ancient appliances, a pantry with shelves built into the walls, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that looked as if it belonged in a museum. Every surface was coated in a fine layer of dust, and the air smelled of old paper, wood smoke, and something metallic she couldn't quite place. She found the pantry surprisingly well stocked, the shelves lined with jars of preserves and canned goods, some so old their labels had faded to nothing. The refrigerator was unplugged, but the cold was enough to keep their meager groceries from spoiling. Claire made a mental note to ration everything carefully. She didn't know when they'd be able to get to town again, or if the road would even be passable once the weather turned. Upstairs, the bedrooms were just as she'd left them the night before, beds stripped bare, closets empty except for a few moth-eaten coats and a trunk of linens that smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. The bathroom was functional, though the pipes groaned in protest when Claire turned the tap. She let the water run until it cleared, grateful for the small mercy of indoor plumbing. Lily woke mid-morning, shivering but eager to explore. Together, they moved from room to room, Claire pointing out the quirks and charms of their new home. "This was probably the study," she said, showing Lily a small room with a desk built from dark wood. "And this must have been the master bedroom. Look at that view." But the house was not without its dangers. The floors creaked ominously in places, and Claire found a section of hallway where the boards had rotted through, revealing the dark crawl space below. She marked it off with a chair, warning Lily to stay away. In the basement, she discovered a maze of storage rooms, some filled with old furniture and trunks, others empty except for the echo of their footsteps. The air down there was colder still, and Claire felt a prickle of unease as she moved through the shadows. The hardest part was the isolation. The grounds were overgrown, the trees so dense they blocked out the sun by mid-afternoon. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the only sounds were the wind in the branches and the occasional creak of the house settling. Claire checked her phone. No signal. The landline in the kitchen was dead, the wires chewed through by time or animals. They were truly alone. As the day wore on, Claire set to work making the house livable. She swept floors, aired out the bedrooms, and started a fire in the main room's stone hearth. Lily helped where she could, her small hands red with cold but eager to please. They hung blankets over the windows to keep out the drafts and piled every spare quilt and coat onto their makeshift beds. By evening, the house felt a little less alien, a little more like home. Claire cooked a simple meal of soup and bread, and they ate by candlelight, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the walls. Lily told stories about the mansion, inventing tales of secret passages and hidden treasures. Claire listened, grateful for her daughter's imagination, for the way she could find wonder even in the bleakest circumstances. That night, as they huddled together in the main room, Claire listened to the wind howl outside and felt a strange sense of peace. The house was still cold, still full of secrets and challenges, but it was theirs. For the first time in months, Claire allowed herself to hope that they could make it work, that they could build a life here, in this strange, forgotten place, and turn it into a home. The first week in the mansion was a test of endurance, resourcefulness, and faith. Claire quickly learned that survival in this crumbling house was not just about shelter from the elements, but about facing a new set of dangers and doubts that threatened to unravel her fragile hope. The cold was relentless. No matter how many fires Claire built, the warmth never seemed to last. The house was vast, and the heat from the wood stove and fireplace barely reached beyond the rooms they occupied. Claire rationed the firewood, but the pile dwindled faster than she'd expected. She bundled Lily in layers of sweaters and blankets, but still the child's lips turned blue in the mornings, and her hands were always cold to the touch. Claire's own fingers grew cracked and raw, and her joints ached from the chill that seeped into her bones. Food was another constant worry. The pantry's jars and cans were a blessing, but Claire knew they wouldn't last forever. She made careful lists, planning meals with the precision of a field general, stretching every crumb and drop. The nearest town was a 2-hour drive on a good day, and the weather made the road nearly impassable. Claire tried to keep her anxiety from Lily, but the child noticed the way her mother's eyes lingered on the emptying shelves, the way she measured out portions with a trembling hand. The isolation began to wear on them both. Days passed without seeing another soul. The grounds were beautiful, but they were also a prison, the trees pressing close, the silence broken only by the wind and the occasional distant crack of a branch. Claire tried to keep Lily occupied, reading books, playing games, inventing stories. But the child grew restless, her laughter fading as the days grew shorter and the nights longer. It was during one of those long, dark nights that the first real danger appeared. Claire was awakened by a strange sound, a deep, groaning creak that seemed to come from the very bones of the house. She sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by a sharp crack. She grabbed a flashlight and crept into the hallway, her breath clouding in the cold air. The floorboards beneath her feet felt different, softer, as if something had shifted below. In the morning, Claire discovered the source of the noise. A section of the main room's floor had buckled, the old wood warped and splintered. She knelt to inspect it, and found that the ground beneath had shifted, likely from the rain and the slow decay of the foundation. The damage was worse than she'd feared. A gaping crack ran the length of the room, and when she pressed on the boards, they gave way, revealing a dark, earthy void below. Claire's heart sank. She had no idea how to fix something like this. No money for repairs, and no one to call for help. The next day brought another setback. Claire ventured outside to gather more firewood, only to find the shed nearly empty. The previous owner must have stocked it for a single person, not a family trying to survive a brutal season. Claire tried to chop more wood from the fallen branches around the property, but the axe was dull, and her hands were clumsy with cold. She worked until her arms ached, but the pile barely grew. That evening, as Claire struggled to light the stove, Lily came to her, eyes wide with worry. "Mom, what if we run out of wood? What if we can't stay warm?" Claire forced a smile, but inside, fear gnawed at her. "We'll be okay, sweetheart, I promise." But the promise felt hollow. The challenges weren't just physical. The emotional toll of their isolation and hardship began to show. Lily grew quiet, her usual curiosity dulled by the monotony of their days. She missed her friends, her school, the routines of their old life. Claire tried to keep her spirits up, but she too felt the weight of loneliness pressing in. At night, she lay awake, listening to the wind and the creaks of the house, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. Then came the first sign of hostility from the outside world. It happened on a gray afternoon, when Claire decided to brave the road to town for supplies. The drive was treacherous, the car slipping and sliding on the muddy track. When she finally reached the small general store, she was met with wary stares. The woman behind the counter, bundled in layers, eyed Claire with suspicion as she rang up the groceries. "You're the one who moved into the old Greystone place, aren't you?" she asked, her tone flat. Claire nodded, trying to sound cheerful. "Yes, that's us. I'm Claire, and this is my daughter, Lily." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "That house has been empty for years. Folks around here say it's cursed. Bad things happen to people who stay there too long." Claire tried to laugh it off, but the words stuck with her. As she loaded the groceries into the car, she noticed a group of men standing by the gas pumps, watching her. Their conversation stopped as she approached, and one of them spat on the ground, his eyes cold. "Best be careful out there," he said. The Woods don't take kindly to strangers. Claire drove home with her heart pounding, the groceries rattling in the back seat. She tried to hide her fear from Lily, but the child sensed it. That night, as the wind howled and the house creaked, Claire lay awake, wondering if the townspeople's warnings were more than just superstition. The days blurred together, each one a battle against the cold, the hunger, and the growing sense of unease. Claire found herself jumping at every sound, checking the locks twice before bed, and keeping the axe close at hand. She started to notice things she hadn't before. Footprints in the mud that didn't match her own, the faint smell of smoke on the wind, the feeling of being watched when she ventured outside. One evening, as Claire was bringing in firewood, she found a note pinned to the front door. The paper was damp and the handwriting shaky, but the message was clear. "You don't belong here. Leave while you still can." Claire's hands shook as she read it. She looked around, but the grounds were silent, the moss undisturbed. She tore the note down and stuffed it in her pocket, forcing herself to act normal for Lily's sake. But the fear lingered. Claire began to question every decision she'd made. Was she putting her daughter in danger by staying? Was the promise of a home worth the risk? The mansion, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a trap, its secrets pressing in from all sides. The final blow came when Lily fell ill. It started with a cough, then a fever that wouldn't break. Claire did her best, bundling her in blankets, making tea from the herbs she found in the pantry, reading stories to distract her from the chills. But the nearest doctor was hours away, and the road was impassable with mud. Claire sat by her daughter's side, holding her hand, praying for the fever to break. As the days passed, Claire's hope began to fade. She felt utterly alone, cut off from the world, powerless to help the person she loved most. She thought of her grandmother, of the generations who had lived and died in this house, and wondered if she was strong enough to survive. But just as Claire was about to give in to despair, a new sound broke the silence, a faint, rhythmic tapping from somewhere behind the walls. At first she thought it was her imagination, the product of too many sleepless nights. But the sound persisted, growing louder, more insistent. Claire followed it through the house, down the creaking stairs, into the cold, dark basement. There, in the far corner, behind a stack of old trunks, she found a section of wall that sounded hollow when she knocked. The tapping seemed to come from within, as if something, or someone, was trying to get her attention. Claire's heart pounded as she pressed her ear to the wall, listening. The sound was unmistakable now. A pattern, a message. She didn't know what it meant, or what she would find if she kept searching. But in that moment, Claire felt a flicker of hope, a sense that the house was trying to tell her something, that the answers she needed were hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. And as the wind howled outside and Lily slept fitfully upstairs, Claire made a silent promise. She would not give up. She would fight for her daughter, for their future, and for the truth buried in the heart of the old Greystone mansion. Whatever secrets the house held, she was determined to uncover them, even if it meant risking everything. The tapping in the basement haunted Claire for days. Each night, after Lily finally drifted into a feverish sleep, Claire would creep down the creaking stairs, flashlight in hand, and press her ear to the cold stone wall. Sometimes the sound was there, steady, deliberate, almost like Morse code. Other times, only silence greeted her, broken by the distant groan of the house settling in the damp. She tried to convince herself it was just the pipes, or the wind, or her own exhaustion playing tricks. But deep down, Claire knew the house was trying to tell her something. On the third night, Claire decided to investigate further. She moved the trunks aside, revealing a patch of wall that looked subtly different from the rest, less worn, the mortar newer, the stones set in a slightly different pattern. She tapped along the surface, listening for a hollow echo, and her heart leapt when she found it. There was a space behind the wall, she was sure of it. But how to get through? She searched the basement for tools, finally settling on a rusted crowbar she found in the old coal bin. With careful, determined effort, she pried at the edges of the stonework. The work was slow and grueling, her hands numb with cold. But at last, one stone shifted, then another, until she'd opened a small gap just wide enough to reach through. Inside, her fingers brushed against something smooth and cold, a metal box. Claire's breath caught as she pulled it free, dust and cobwebs trailing from its corners. She carried it upstairs, setting it on the kitchen table beneath the flickering light. Lily, pale but curious, watched from her nest of blankets. "What is it, Mom?" "I don't know yet," Claire whispered, her hands trembling as she worked the old latch. The box creaked open, revealing a stack of yellowed papers, a leather-bound journal, and a bundle of faded photographs tied with string. Claire opened the journal first. The handwriting was elegant, looping, and old-fashioned. The first page was dated March 1939. "To whoever finds this, know that this house was built on secrets. My name is Eleanor Greystone, and I have done things here that must never be forgotten, nor ever be repeated." Claire's eyes widened as she read on. The entries spoke of the war, of men arriving in the dead of night, of shipments hidden in the house, of a secret room constructed behind the walls, deeper than the visible cellar, accessible only by a hidden door. The journal described how Eleanor, an amateur historian and collector, had been entrusted by a network of families to safeguard rare manuscripts and artifacts during the chaos of the 1940s. She wrote of crates, sealed, catalogued, and hidden away, meant to be a hedge against the destruction of war and the loss of culture. "If the world falls, these treasures will help rebuild it. But if peace endures, let them remain hidden, a secret kept for the good of all." Claire's hands shook as she turned the pages. The later entries grew more anxious. Eleanor wrote of strangers in the village, of threats and warnings, of a promise to her family that the secret would die with her. The final entry was dated 1957. "If you are reading this, then the world has changed. Trust no one. The key is in the old clock. The door is behind the library shelves." Lily, sensing her mother's excitement, sat up. "What does it mean, Mom?" Claire tried to explain, her voice hushed. "I think there's another room in the house, a secret room, and something important is hidden there." They spent the next day searching the house for the old clock. It was Lily who found it, tucked away in the library behind a stack of books, a heavy brass mantel clock, its face cracked but still ticking faintly. Claire turned it over and found a small compartment in the base. Inside was a tarnished brass key, cold and heavy in her palm. Armed with the key and the journal's clues, Claire returned to the library. She examined the shelves, running her hands along the rough wood. At last, her fingers found a seam, a hairline crack in the paneling. She pressed, and a section of the shelf shifted, revealing a narrow door, almost invisible in the gloom. The key fit perfectly. With a deep breath, Claire turned it, and the door swung open on silent hinges. A rush of cold, stale air greeted her. She shone her flashlight into the darkness, revealing a steep set of steps descending into the earth. The walls were lined with stone and wood, the air thick with the scent of metal and secrets long kept. Claire hesitated, fear warring with curiosity, but Lily's small hand slipped into hers, steady and brave. "Let's go, Mom," she whispered. Together, they descended into the hidden chamber. The room at the bottom was larger than Claire expected, its walls lined with shelves and crates. In the center stood a table, and on it, a map of the property, marked with cryptic symbols and notes in Eleanor's handwriting. Claire's eyes darted around the room, taking in the details: the heavy steel door at the far end, the ventilation shafts, the emergency supplies stacked neatly in the corners. But it was the crates that drew her attention. Each was stamped with a government seal and a date from the 1940s. Claire pried one open, her heart pounding. Inside, nestled in straw, were manuscripts, illuminated texts, rare first editions, and artifacts gleaming dully in the flashlight's beam. Claire gasped, her mind reeling. The journal had been telling the truth. The fortune was real. As Claire and Lily explored the chamber, they found more clues, documents detailing the origins of the collection, letters from families who had entrusted their treasures to Eleanor, and a ledger listing names and dates. The story that emerged was one of wartime fear, of desperate measures taken to protect the world's knowledge, of a family sworn to secrecy for generations. But the discovery brought new fears. Claire remembered the warnings in the journal, the threats from the townspeople, the feeling of being watched. She realized that others might know about the collection, that the danger was far from over. The house's secrets were now her burden, and she would have to decide how to protect them, and her daughter, from those who would do anything to claim the fortune for themselves. That night, as Claire sat by the fire, the manuscripts and artifacts stacked on the table before her, she felt the weight of history pressing down. The house had given up its secrets, but at a cost. The mystery had deepened, and the stakes had never been higher. Claire knew that the hardest choices still lay ahead, and that the true test of her courage was only beginning. The discovery of the secret chamber and its priceless contents changed everything for Claire, but it also brought a new kind of fear. She knew she couldn't keep such a secret forever, not in a town as small and insular as Greystone Hollow, where every newcomer was noticed, and every rumor spread like wildfire. The next morning, Claire woke early, her mind racing with questions. Who could she trust? Who might already suspect that the old mansion was more than it seemed? Her first instinct was to keep Lily close and avoid town, but the fever had left her daughter weak, and Claire knew she needed medicine and fresh food. She bundled Lily in layers and drove the muddy road to the general store, her heart pounding with every mile. The same woman was behind the counter, her eyes sharp and curious. "Back again so soon?" she asked, her tone softer than before. "How's the little one?" Claire hesitated, then decided on honesty. "She's been sick. I could use some advice. Do you know a good doctor nearby?" The woman's expression softened. "I'm Ruth. My husband's the nurse at the clinic in town. I'll call ahead for you." She rang up Claire's groceries and added a jar of homemade soup to the bag. "On the house. Winters are hard here. We look out for each other, even if we don't always show it." Claire felt a wave of relief. Maybe not everyone in Greystone Hollow was an enemy. As she left, she noticed one of the men from the gas station watching her from across the street, his arms folded, his gaze cold. Claire hurried Lily into the car and drove away, the sense of being watched prickling at her skin. That afternoon, Ruth stopped by the house with her husband, Tom. They checked on Lily, offered advice, and left behind a bag of medicine and a promise to return. "If you need anything, you call us," Tom said, his voice firm. "Don't let the old stories scare you. That house has always been a part of Greystone Hollow, even if folks like to pretend otherwise. But not everyone was so welcoming." The next day, Claire found muddy boot prints on the porch and a second note, this one more direct. "You don't know what you're sitting on. Leave before it's too late." That night, she heard a car idling at the end of the driveway, headlights cutting through the trees before vanishing into the darkness. Claire double-checked the locks and kept the crowbar close at hand. The tension in town grew. At the post office, a man Claire didn't recognize cornered her by the mailboxes. "You're the new owner, right? Greystone's granddaughter?" His voice was low, almost friendly, but his eyes were calculating. "That house has a history. People say there's more to it than meets the eye. You planning to sell?" Claire shook her head, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's just a house. I'm not going anywhere." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Everyone's got a price. Remember that." Word spread quickly that Claire had no intention of leaving. Some neighbors kept their distance, whispering behind her back. Others, like Ruth and Tom, became unexpected allies, dropping off food, firewood, and advice. Claire learned to tell the difference between genuine kindness and curiosity, laced with greed. But the most persistent opposition came from her in-laws. Judith and Robert called often, their voices sharp with judgment. "You're still in that dump?" Judith would sneer. "You know, Claire, you could have just asked us for help. Instead, you're dragging Lily through the mud, literally and figuratively." Robert was more subtle but no less cutting. "We're worried about Lily's well-being." "That house isn't safe. Maybe it's time to reconsider your options." Claire bit back her anger. "We're managing. Lily is safe. I'm doing everything I can." Judith's voice would turn icy. "You always were stubborn. But don't expect us to bail you out when it all falls apart." The words stung, but Claire refused to let them see her doubt. She leaned on Ruth and Tom, grateful for their friendship. She kept Lily close, teaching her to be careful with strangers and to trust her instincts. And every night, as she locked the doors and checked the windows, Claire promised herself that she would protect her daughter and their new home, no matter what enemies might be lurking in the shadows of the old mansion. As the days passed, Claire realized that the mansion's secrets were not just hers to bear. The manuscripts, the artifacts, the history, they were all tied to the community, to old wounds and old ambitions. Some people wanted to help, others wanted to profit, and a few would do anything to claim the fortune for themselves. But Claire also saw the good that could come from her choices. She began to imagine a future where the mansion was not just a refuge for her and Lily, but a place of healing and hope for others. The thought gave her strength. She would not let fear or greed decide her fate. She would choose courage, and she would choose what was right, even if it meant standing alone. The days after discovering the manuscripts and artifacts were a blur of anxiety and vigilance. Claire kept the secret chamber hidden, but the weight of what she'd found pressed on her every moment. She slept lightly, always listening for footsteps outside, always watching for unfamiliar faces in town. Lily, still recovering, sensed her tension and clung to her side, her questions about the house growing more insistent. Claire tried to reassure her, but she knew that the real answers, the ones that mattered, were still buried somewhere within the mansion's walls. One rainy afternoon, as Claire sorted through the documents from Eleanor's journal, she noticed something she'd missed before. Tucked between the pages was a folded sheet of parchment, brittle with age. On it was a series of numbers and symbols, arranged in a pattern that looked almost like a puzzle. At the bottom, in Eleanor's careful script, was a single line: "For those who seek, the answer lies where the stories sleep." Claire stared at the words, her mind racing. She thought of the library, the wall of empty shelves, the way the dust seemed to settle differently in one corner. Was there more to the chamber than she'd found? She called Lily to her side, showing her the parchment. Together, they traced the numbers and symbols, trying to make sense of the code. Lily's eyes lit up. "Mom, look! The numbers match the books on the shelf." She pointed to a row of dusty volumes in the library, each one labeled with a faded number. Claire's heart pounded as she pulled the books down, arranging them in the order from the parchment. When she pressed the spine of the last book, there was a soft click from somewhere behind the shelves. They hurried to the far end of the library, following the sound. In the corner, where the shelves met the wall, a small panel had slid open, revealing a hidden lever. Claire hesitated, her hand trembling, then pulled the lever. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, and a section of the floor slowly shifted, revealing a narrow spiral staircase descending even deeper into the earth. Claire shone her flashlight down the steps, the beam swallowed by darkness. The air that rose up was colder, tinged with the scent of old paper and secrets long kept. Lily squeezed her hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Should we go down?" Claire nodded, her fear mingling with excitement. "We have to. This is what Eleanor wanted us to find." They descended the staircase, the walls narrowing as they went. The stone here was older, rougher, and the air felt heavy with history. At the bottom, they found a heavy iron door, its surface etched with the same symbols from the parchment. Claire pressed her palm to the center, and the door swung open with a groan. Inside was a chamber unlike anything Claire had ever seen. The walls were lined with shelves, each one stacked with ledgers, maps, and more manuscripts, far more than she'd found above. But what caught her eye was a large, leather-bound book resting on a pedestal in the center of the room. She opened it, her hands trembling, and found page after page of detailed records, not just of the collection, but of the people who had hidden it, the deals struck in secret, the promises made and broken over generations. The final pages were written in Eleanor's hand. "If you have found this, you are the last of us. The fortune is yours to protect, but its true value lies in the truth it represents. Use it wisely. Do not let greed or fear guide you. Remember the cost of secrets and the power of hope." Claire stood in the secret room, the weight of history and possibility pressing down on her. She realized that her family's fortune was not just in money or artifacts, but in the choices she would make from this moment on. The discovery was a turning point, not just for their survival, but for their future. As she and Lily climbed back up to the library, Claire felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, but now it was joined by determination. She would not run. She would not hide. She would face whatever came next, armed with the truth and the knowledge that she was not alone. The mansion had given up its greatest secret, and now, at last, Claire was ready to claim her place as its guardian. The days after the discovery of the second secret room were filled with a strange electric hope. Claire felt lighter, more purposeful, as if the mansion itself had finally accepted them. She made plans. How to secure the manuscripts, how to document everything, how to quietly seek legal advice without drawing attention. But just as she began to believe they might truly have a future here, the world outside their fragile sanctuary closed in. It started with a knock at the door one evening. Just as the sun was setting behind the tangled trees, Claire's heart leapt into her throat. She peered through the narrow window and saw Judith and Robert standing on the porch, their faces set in grim lines. Behind them, a car idled, headlights cutting through the dusk. Claire opened the door a crack, her body blocking Lily from view. "Evening, Claire," Judith said, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." Claire hesitated, but the in-laws pushed past her, filling the entryway with the scent of expensive perfume and cold air. Robert spoke first. "We've heard rumors. People in town are saying you found something in this house. Something valuable." Claire's blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Judith's eyes narrowed. Don't play dumb. We know you're hiding something. And we're not the only ones. The town council is talking about eminent domain. They want to seize the property, claim it's a historical site. You could lose everything, Claire. Everything you've worked for. Claire's hands shook. This was my grandmother's house. She left it to me. I haven't done anything wrong. Judith's voice turned icy. You always were stubborn. But you're not thinking about Lily. What happens to her if you lose this place? Maybe it's time to let someone else take over. Someone who knows how to handle a legacy. The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Claire felt Lily's small hand slip into hers, trembling. She drew her daughter close, her mind racing. She thought of the manuscripts, the secret rooms, the journals, everything she'd worked so hard to protect. It could all be taken from her, just like that. The in-laws left as quickly as they'd come, but the damage was done. Claire spent the night pacing the house, checking the locks, peering out into the darkness for headlights or shadows moving among the trees. She barely slept, haunted by the knowledge that she was no longer safe, that the mansion was no longer a sanctuary. The next morning, the real blow fell. Claire woke to the sound of shattering glass. She rushed to the kitchen to find the window broken, icy wind howling through the gap. On the table was a rock wrapped in a piece of paper. The message was simple. Leave now, or next time it's fire. Claire's hands shook as she cleaned up the glass, her mind spinning with fear and anger. She called Ruth and Tom, desperate for advice, but even their voices were strained. You need to be careful, Claire, Ruth warned. There are people in this town who will do anything to keep that fortune from leaving. Maybe you should think about leaving, just for a while. But Claire knew she couldn't run. Not now. Not after everything she and Lily had survived. She tried to keep up a brave face for her daughter, but the fear was always there, lurking in every shadow, every creak of the house. Then, as if fate wanted to test her resolve, disaster struck. Lily, still weak from her illness, slipped on the icy steps outside and fell hard, hitting her head. Claire's scream echoed through the halls as she rushed to her daughter's side, blood staining the stone. She carried Lily inside, her hands shaking, her heart pounding with terror. For a moment, she thought she might lose her, her only reason for fighting, for staying, for hoping. Claire worked through the night, tending to Lily's wound, praying for the fever not to return. She felt utterly alone, cut off from help, surrounded by enemies and haunted by the weight of her choices. The manuscripts, the house, the legacy. It all seemed meaningless compared to the fragile life of her child. As dawn broke, Claire sat by Lily's bedside, exhausted and afraid. She realized that she might lose everything. The house, the fortune, even her daughter. The darkness pressed in, threatening to swallow her whole. But as the first light crept through the window, Claire made a silent vow. She would not give up. She would fight for Lily, for their home, for the right to choose their own future. No matter what the town, the in-laws, or the past threw at her, she would not let the darkness win. The mansion had tested her, broken her, but it had also revealed her strength. And as Claire watched her daughter sleep, she knew that the darkest hour was not the end, but the moment before the dawn. The storm that had battered Greystone Hollow for days finally broke, leaving the world outside the mansion washed clean and eerily quiet. Claire sat at Lily's bedside, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. But as the morning sun crept through the window, she saw color returning to her daughter's cheeks. Lily's breathing was steady, her fever gone. Relief washed over Claire, fierce and overwhelming. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope. But the threats from the in-laws, the broken window, and the rock with its chilling message haunted her. Claire knew she couldn't hide forever. The fortune was both a blessing and a curse, and the secret room beneath the mansion was no longer just a mystery. It was a lifeline, and possibly their only chance at survival. That afternoon, with Lily resting, Claire returned to the library. She moved quietly, every sound amplified by her nerves. The hidden door behind the shelves was still ajar from her last visit, the cold air seeping out like a warning. She descended the narrow steps, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. The passageway felt different now, less like a tomb, more like a threshold. At the bottom, Claire paused, remembering Eleanor Greystone's words. The fortune is yours to protect, but its true value lies in the truth it represents. She pressed on, entering the secret chamber. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and metal, and her breath fogged in the cold. She moved to the crates, her hands trembling as she pried one open. The straw inside was brittle with age, but beneath it gleamed the unmistakable luster of gold leaf and the soft glow of ancient parchment. Claire lifted a manuscript, its cover embossed with intricate designs, its pages filled with careful script and illuminated illustrations. She counted the crates, dozens of them, each filled with rare manuscripts, first editions, and artifacts, jeweled chalices, ancient coins, a violin inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a set of letters sealed with wax. Each item was a silent testament to the secrets the house had kept for generations. Claire's mind reeled. She tried to calculate the value, but the numbers became meaningless. It was more wealth than she could ever spend, more than she could even imagine. But as she looked around the room, she realized the fortune was only part of the legacy. The shelves were lined with ledgers, maps, and documents, records of the collection's origins, lists of names, letters from families who had entrusted their treasures to Eleanor, and Eleanor's journal, chronicling the decisions and sacrifices that had led to this moment. She sat at the table in the center of the room, opening the leather-bound book she'd found on the pedestal. The final entries were written in a shaky hand, but the message was clear. If you have found this, you are the last of us. The fortune is not just for you. It is for those who come after, for the rebuilding of what is lost, for the hope that endures even in the darkest times.
Guard it well.
Use it wisely, and remember, the greatest fortune is not in gold or parchment, but in the courage to do what is right. Tears filled Claire's eyes as she read. She thought of her grandmother, of the generations who had lived and died in this house, of the sacrifices made to keep this secret safe. She thought of Lily, sleeping upstairs, and the future she wanted to build for her, a future free from fear, from hunger, from the shadows of the past. Claire spent hours in the chamber, documenting everything. She took photos of the manuscripts, the artifacts, the journals. She made copies of the most important records, hiding them in different places around the house. She knew she would need help, legal advice, protection, maybe even the authorities. But she also knew she had to be careful. The fortune was a target, and there were people in Greystone Hollow who would do anything to claim it. As evening fell, Claire returned upstairs, her mind racing with plans. She called Ruth and Tom, asking them to come by. When they arrived, Claire told them everything about the chamber, the fortune, the threats, and her fears. Ruth listened in stunned silence, then hugged Claire fiercely. "You're not alone," she said. "We'll help you. We'll protect you and Lily. This town has its secrets, but it also has good people. We'll find a way." With their support, Claire felt a new resolve. She contacted a lawyer in the nearest city, explaining the situation as best she could without revealing too much. The lawyer agreed to help, promising discretion and advice on how to secure the fortune and protect her rights. Claire also reached out to a historian at the State University, sending copies of the documents and asking for help in verifying their authenticity. Word spread quickly, as it always did in small towns. Some neighbors came forward with offers of help, while others grew more hostile, their jealousy and suspicion barely concealed. But Claire stood firm. She had the law on her side, the support of her friends, and the truth of her family's legacy. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and careful planning. The lawyer helped Claire set up a trust to protect the fortune, ensuring that it would be used for Lily's future and for the good of the community. The historian confirmed the document's authenticity, and soon news of the discovery reached the authorities. Federal agents arrived, their questions sharp but respectful, and Claire showed them everything: the manuscripts, the records, the journals. In the end, the government claimed a portion of the collection, citing its origins and the need to preserve history. But Claire was not left empty-handed. She received a substantial reward for her honesty and cooperation, enough to secure her and Lily's future. More importantly, she kept the journals, the documents, and the story of her family's courage, a legacy that could never be taken away. As the forest bloomed with spring, Claire stood on the porch of the mansion, watching Lily play in the sunlight. The house was no longer a place of fear and secrets, but a home, warm, safe, and filled with hope. The fortune had changed their lives, but it was the truth, the courage, and the love they had found that would endure. Claire knew there would always be challenges, always be shadows at the edge of the woods. But she also knew that she and Lily had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. The secret chamber had given up its treasure and in doing so had given them a new beginning. A future built not on gold or parchment, but on the strength of their hearts. The days after the discovery of the hidden fortune were unlike anything Claire had ever known. The mansion, once a place of cold and uncertainty, now felt alive with possibility. Claire moved through its rooms with a new sense of purpose, her steps lighter, her heart unburdened by the constant fear that had shadowed her for so long. Lily, too, was changed. Her laughter returned, echoing through the halls as she played in the sunlit rooms, her cheeks rosy and her eyes bright with hope. But with the fortune came decisions, ones that weighed heavily on Claire's mind. The manuscripts and artifacts were worth more than she could have ever imagined, but so was the responsibility. The journals and documents made it clear this was not just a windfall, but a legacy. The collection had been hidden for a reason, meant to be a safeguard for the future, not a prize for the present. Claire knew she could not simply sell everything and disappear. The story of the mansion, and the people who had trusted her family, deserved to be honored. The first transformation was practical. With the help of her lawyer, Claire established a trust to secure the assets and ensure that Lily would always have a home. She used a portion of the funds to repair and modernize the mansion, installing proper heating, plumbing, and electricity. The once drab rooms became warm and inviting, filled with light and color. She created a bedroom for Lily, a kitchen where they could cook real meals, and a study where Claire could work and keep the records safe. But Claire's vision extended beyond her own family. Inspired by the stories in Eleanor Greystone's journal, she reached out to local charities and shelters, offering anonymous donations to help families facing the same hardships she had endured. She funded scholarships for children in the community, supported the local clinic, and worked with Ruth and Tom to create a food pantry for those in need. The mansion's legacy of hope was no longer a secret. It became a force for good, rippling outward to touch lives far beyond its walls. The transformation was also personal. Claire found herself growing in confidence, her voice stronger when she spoke at town meetings or advocated for others. She became a fixture in the community, not as the outsider who lived in the old Greystone mansion, but as a neighbor, a friend, and a leader. Lily thrived at her new school, making friends and excelling in her classes. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, became a place of gathering and laughter. Yet, even as their lives improved, Claire never forgot the lessons of the past. She kept the secret chamber secure, sharing its story only with those she trusted completely. She continued to study the documents and artifacts, working with historians and archivists to preserve the knowledge for future generations. The mansion became a place of learning, a living museum where the past and present met, and where the values of courage, resilience, and compassion were passed on. One evening, as the family sat together in their newly renovated home, Claire looked at Lily and felt a deep sense of peace. They had come so far, from the edge of despair to a place of safety and hope. The journey had been hard, marked by loss and fear, but it had also revealed strengths they never knew they possessed. The wealth they had found was not just in gold or manuscripts, but in the love they shared, the community they had built, and the future they could now shape. Lily snuggled close, her voice soft. "Do you think Grandma Eleanor would be proud of us?" Claire smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I think she hoped we would find all this, and I think she trusted us to do the right thing." Lily grinned, holding up a drawing she'd made of the mansion as a castle. "We're like the guardians now, right, Mom?" Claire hugged her, her heart full. "Yes, baby, we're the guardians, and we'll make sure this place is always a home. For us, and for anyone who needs it." The transformation was complete, but the journey was far from over. The family had found not just a fortune, but a purpose. And as they looked to the future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger, wiser, and forever changed by the secrets they had uncovered and the hope they had restored. As the seasons changed and the grounds of the Greystone mansion bloomed with new life, Claire's choices began to ripple outward, shaping not only her family's future, but the very heart of Greystone Hollow. The transformation of the old house, from a place of secrets and survival into a beacon of hope, became a story that spread quietly at first, then with growing momentum, as more people learned of the kindness and generosity that flowed from its doors. Claire's decision to use the fortune for good did not go unnoticed. The food pantry she helped establish with Ruth and Tom became a lifeline for struggling families, its shelves always stocked, and its doors always open. The scholarships she funded sent local children to college, some the first in their families to ever dream of such a thing. The clinic, once threatened with closure, flourished with new equipment and staff, all made possible by anonymous donations that everyone soon guessed came from the woman in the Greystone mansion. But the impact was more than financial. Claire's story, her resilience, her refusal to give up, her willingness to share what she had found, became a quiet inspiration. People who had once kept their distance now stopped by with casseroles, tools, or simply to say thank you. Lily was welcomed into the fold, her laughter and energy breathing new life into the town's school and playgrounds. The family that had once been homeless and alone was now at the heart of a community, their journey a testament to the power of hope and the strength found in helping others. Claire never sought recognition. She kept the details of the secret chamber closely guarded, sharing its history only with those she trusted and with the historians who helped her preserve its legacy. The artifacts and documents were carefully catalogued, some donated to museums, Others kept safe for future generations. The story of the Greystone Mansion and the network of ordinary people who had risked everything to safeguard Hope became a chapter in the town's history, one that would be told and retold for years to come. Yet for all the good that came from the discovery, Claire knew that the true legacy was not in the gold or the manuscripts, but in the choices she made every day. She taught Lily that wealth was a tool, not a goal, that kindness was a currency more valuable than any coin, and that the greatest treasures were the bonds they built with others. The mansion, once a place of hiding, was now a place of gathering, home not just for her family, but for anyone in need of shelter, comfort, or a second chance. As word of the family's journey spread beyond Greystone Hollow, people from neighboring communities began to visit, drawn by curiosity and the hope of finding inspiration for their own lives. Some came seeking help, others simply to see the place where a single act of courage had changed so many lives. Claire welcomed them all, her door always open, her story always shared with humility and gratitude. And so, the legacy of the mansion grew, not as a monument to the past, but as a living promise for the future. Claire's choices had created a ripple effect, touching lives she would never know, inspiring acts of kindness she would never witness. The family's journey from homelessness to hope became a beacon for anyone who had ever felt lost, alone, or afraid to dream. As the sun set over the woods, and the lights of the mansion glowed warmly in the dusk, Claire stood at the entrance, Lily at her side. She looked out at the world, her heart full of gratitude and wonder at how far they had come. She knew there would be challenges ahead, there always were, but she also knew that together they could face anything. And to anyone watching, anyone listening, anyone wondering if hope was still possible, Claire's story offered a simple, powerful call to action. Don't give up. The world is full of hidden doors and second chances. Sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the darkest places, and sometimes the choice to open a door, no matter how heavy, can change everything. If you've been moved by this story, don't let it end here. Reach out, help someone in need, or take a chance on your own hidden potential. The next chapter of hope could begin with you. As summer settled over Greystone Hollow and the mansion's gardens burst into color, Claire often found herself standing at the window, looking out over the land that had once felt so cold and forbidding. The house was alive now, filled with laughter, warmth, and the gentle hum of a community that had grown around it. Yet, even as life settled into a hopeful rhythm, Claire knew that the story of the Greystone Mansion was far from over. There were still secrets hidden in the walls and whispers in the woods. The journals she had preserved hinted at other caches, other families entrusted with similar legacies, and cryptic references to the network that had once spanned the country. Maps with faded markings, letters written in code, and names she didn't recognize suggested that the Greystone fortune was only one thread in a much larger tapestry. What had become of the other guardians? What treasures or truths might still be waiting, buried beneath forgotten fields or locked behind rusted doors? Lily, ever the dreamer, would sometimes sit at the kitchen table, poring over the old maps and tracing routes with her finger. "Do you think there are other houses like ours, Mom?" she'd ask, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Maybe there are other families who need help too. Maybe we could find them." Claire encouraged her daughter's curiosity, knowing that the spirit of exploration and hope was the true inheritance Eleanor Greystone had left them. She began to correspond with historians and archivists, sharing what she could about the network and seeking clues about the other hidden shelters. Each letter, each conversation, opened new doors, some literal, some figurative, inviting the family to imagine a future filled with purpose and possibility. And so, as the days grew longer and the world outside beckoned, Claire and Lily found themselves standing at the threshold of a new adventure. The mansion had given them safety, but it had also given them a mission to seek out the forgotten, to protect the vulnerable, and to keep the flame of hope alive for those still searching in the dark. Their story was far from over. There were mysteries yet to solve, friendships yet to forge, and lives yet to touch. Perhaps, somewhere out there, another family was waiting for a letter, a key, or a sign that they too could find sanctuary and purpose in the most unexpected of places. If you've followed this journey and felt the pull of curiosity, don't let the story end here. There are always more doors to open, more secrets to uncover, and more lives to change. Join us for the next chapter, because every ending is just the beginning of another adventure. Subscribe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the greatest journeys start with a single step into the unknown. The next mystery awaits.